Everyone, and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm really pleased to announce Anna Whitcher as today's presenter. In addition to being an ELT writer and editor, Anna has extensive experience in filmmaking and film production, particularly short films for the ELT market. She's worked with many ELT publishers as a scriptwriter, producer, director and project manager, applying both her editorial skills and her creative sensibility to the films she's helped to develop. So, over to you, Anna.
Hello, good morning, everyone from San Francisco, California. It's quite early, 7 a.m. I know some of you are on the very late side of things. So I really appreciate everyone coming to attend. It's wonderful to see such a broad audience, so many different people from different places, and I hope that you'll be able to take away something today about video, using video in your classroom and also creating video with your students. From what I can tell from what people have said in the little sidebar, it sounds like most of you enjoy using video in your classroom, which is great to hear. But that creating it is something that some of you have started trying to do and are wanting to find out ways to incorporate that into your lesson planning. And I hope that I'm going to be able to give you some steps today in how to start doing that. So thank you for answering those questions and having to think about it. If these are things that you'd like to discuss further at some point, please feel free to email me. At the end, you'll see my email, and I'd love to discuss them with you further, as this is something that I think getting teachers on board is one of the more important parts of encouraging students to make video in their classroom. I'd like to start today by talking about some experiences I've had working in the classroom. I'm coming into this as a teacher, but also as a film producer, as Alistair mentioned. So I'm trying to bridge those two things together now, and in the hope of helping other teachers learn how to incorporate this into your classroom. And the biggest thing is trying to get your students to be in charge of this process. And this can be a scary thing. But as soon as you sort of let them be more in charge, this is when you're going to get the best creativity out of it. You can see here, this is a class that I worked with in San Francisco. The children are obviously very excited about being in the director's chair. In fact, one of them just plopped himself right on top of the chair. And you can see two of them are actually using their phones to take the footage. This class was a group of 12 to 13-year-olds, so seventh grade here in San Francisco. And I'll be talking about my experience with them, as well as another class in Madrid, Spain, that a good teacher friend of mine, Victoria Pascual, who is on this chat as well today. Hi, Victoria. I'll be discussing her experience with older students, 16 to 17-year-olds. So all teenagers, but the two ends of the spectrum. The biggest thing is that video creation is student-centered learning to the extreme. So this is where those of you who are using sort of the student learning approach already, this is really taking it to another level, allowing them to be really in charge of the process. They're going to be organizing their own team. They're going to be working together to create their own product. And I've found that to watch them do this, most students are very open to trying to let this process happen. And not only is this something that works very well in your language classroom, but it's giving them a life skill that they can use later in their jobs. A lot of jobs nowadays are requiring more of this project-oriented thinking, working together, working as a team, and not only as an individual. And I find that they embrace this, and it's giving them a skill that they'll be able to use in their work life in the future. Some basic assumptions that you should have when you're doing your first filmmaking project. It's really important to keep these in mind so that you don't feel too uncomfortable when you start this process. The first thing is that your classroom is going to get very loud, and I'm going to talk about that. I know that that can be a little bit disruptive and difficult, and even when I went into these classes to help the students start, I warned the teacher about this, and so if you kind of are ready for that, it doesn't seem quite as scary. Your students will want to sit in different places. So having sort of this just front of the classroom, teacher centered classroom orientation doesn't is not going to work with the video process. You're going to want to allow them to sit in other places, be in other spots. Some are going to want to talk through their ideas. Others are going to want to work silently, writing their script, selecting their photos, deciding on footage or what to take for their footage. Others will want to act out their part or involve others in the creation. That was exciting to see. You are going to get the students who do not want any part of this, especially if you're teaching teenagers and it's just not their thing. The good thing about video creation is that there are all types of different roles that students can have, and I'll be talking about that in a minute here. So, within the chaos of making film, you're going to find something for everyone. So here we are with the class that I worked with most recently about 3 weeks ago, pointing to the fact that your classroom will get very loud. This was one group of children who decided to work as a group of five. And contrary to what you would think that, they'd want to go first to using their phones or some kind of mobile device, all of these kids actually wanted to go straight up to the board and figure out what their main ideas were, what they wanted to talk about. In this particular case, we were talking about tourism sites in San Francisco. If you were to come to San Francisco, what would you want to see? And so they were brainstorming and coming up with all kinds of ideas, and all clearly had something to say. They're going to want to work and engage in different ways. And I liked these two shots here because I think it showed the difference between the kinds of scenarios you're going to see. And it's interesting to see how sort of 12-year-old girls and boys gravitate to different ways of working. We've got the girls on the left here all around the phone and the one computer and chatting away, trying to figure out what they want to do, and the boys with all of their individual computers working silently and trying to sort things out. It was fascinating to see how they were approaching the same project in a different way. So be comfortable with that. Know that you're going to get students doing different things. They shouldn't all be doing it in the same way. If that's a part of the creative process, is having this difference. Okay, and so as I mentioned, film provides an outlet for every type of student. So whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, a writer, an actor, a techie, a musician, an artist, there's this place for all of these types of students, all different types of personalities. And this is very satisfying, I think, for your class in general, because they can all assume a role and feel good about that role and not be forced into, for example, standing up in front of the class and performing. We all know that that's not what everybody's first choice would be. So there's plenty more for your students to do if they're good writers, or if they want to sit and select the music or figure out how the photos should go together. There's a place for that. Do be aware, as I've said, that there is this element of disorder, especially in the beginning, but not to fear that there is going to be a pattern to the chaos. It's just a matter of trying to organize your students well. And I'm going to be giving you the steps to how to do that to limit the amount of chaos and disorder that's happening when you first begin. This is going to have a lot to do with them taking on a role that they feel confident with, and also giving very specific time slots in your lesson planning to work on video. Just to recap, I know that a lot of you, it sounds like, have used video in your classrooms already. And so I'd like to start by talking about what typical types are, how the approach is generally used by most teachers, and then get into how video creation can be, really the watching the video can be a springboard to the video creation. So one of the first types that you, I'm sure, are familiar with are the vox pops, which are the voices of the people on the street, the interviews. These are very typical of video types in ELT. Documentary, which are basically stories guided by a narrative. Situational, which are dramas that are real or created, and usually with actors. Sometimes good actors, sometimes not so good. And this is what I've been working with more recently in my current work is with actors and situations and trying to make them as natural and as authentic as possible. And it can be quite challenging at times, but exciting. Instructional, which are like science experiments, instructions that have visuals with a narrative. These are quite popular and something that is very easily done with students as well if you're doing video creation. Interactive is what we're coming to more these days, where video is actually expecting you to do something as the participant. So it's not just a passive watching. You're actually having to make choices on screen or determine what the next screen is going to be. Those are extremely helpful, especially with language videos. And then finally, student generated, which is what I'm going to focus on today, the how-to videos, documentary, and YouTuber, which is, like the character who's going around showing you the various things. We'll be talking about how to do some of those. Okay. The big thing that I think that we all have to, in order to do this shift from our passive viewing to video creation, is the idea that students are moving from being a consumer to being a producer. And the consumer role is one that I think we're all very well aware of, even in our own lives, where we are just passively watching something. And this is something that can work well in the classroom. I know some of you were commenting on how it's, a kind of a little break, a release that you can just show the video and have that sort of break in your lesson. And that is great, and that's a perfect use of video. But you are acting more as the consumer there, and it's more of a passive position. A producer of video involves more of an active role, and this is what this is where I see video going right now, where we are getting more of the producers, and especially with young people, they are so open to doing this. This is such something that comes to them quite naturally, and something that they're around all the time, that they don't tend to show the nervousness or the trepidation that adults might. And this is what I really think we can capitalize on. But what does a classroom with consumers versus a classroom with producers look like? With a consumer classroom, obviously you're going to have the quieter classroom. And okay, everybody sit back. We're going to watch a video now, especially if it's a longer one. And it's going to be mostly quiet, right? Apart from the occasional comment. A classroom with producers is where you get lots of activity and lots of noise, and this is something that can feel quite discomforting for most of us in the beginning. As a particularly quiet person, I can understand that. But once, like I said, once you get comfortable with it and you start directing the students where they need to be and then allow them to be the directors, you'll find that noise level goes down and you're going to get some wonderful things as a result. So just to review very quickly, the three-step approach to watching video so that we can just make sure everybody's on the same page with that. This is the three-step process that has become quite familiar to teachers who are using video. It's an accepted form. It works well. When you see video activity pages on videos, they usually take this form, which is step one before watching. You're setting the scene for the video. You're finding out from the class what they know about the topic already. It's all something that you're just preparing them for what they're going to see. Then while watching, you usually have a few select questions just to guide the students so that their focus is on something that you have found particularly important or that the video page is wanting to highlight. And then after watching, this is going, usually you have your basic comprehension questions to make sure they've understood it, and then it goes beyond that to try to get bigger messages. What I'm going to be talking about today is going beyond those steps. What happens when you go beyond those watching steps? What does that look like, and how are teachers in the classroom doing this? So we have here the teacher that I worked with most recently Mr. Palomo, who is the French teacher at a school here in San Francisco. And what I found was that when teachers, and this is the same with Victoria in Madrid, that when teachers are very motivated by the process and the topic, if they really have the desire to use video in their classroom, it's going to make all the difference with your students. You can pretty much assume that most of your students are going to want to be involved. As I said, there's going to be the few outliers who are not, but most of them are really going to want to be involved in the process. But you, as the teacher, have to want to do this. This is crucial. I can't tell you enough, and I know Victoria would back me up on this. If you don't have teachers who are interested or who feel that it's going to be too hard or complicated, which is a fair enough fear for sure, um, it's going to be really hard to get this process going in a way that is going to work. So I get the feeling that most of the people, because you're here today at this webinar, that you are motivated by this and want to do this in your classroom. So yay, that's the first half here, the hardest part, getting past that. So if you're motivated, your students are motivated, then we can start talking about how these steps are going to work. So what are these steps that we can do to get into your first filmmaking project? Okay. I've come up with a five-step approach to video creation that eh, I have to say that it was really hard actually to bring it down to five, but I thought, and I could not bring it down to three. So three wasn't happening. Five was a compromise. But you'll probably hear me talking about a few more little add-ons to these steps just to make sure that they work. But five I thought was reasonable and something that could work for your first video project. Step one is to decide on a basic topic and the type of video you want your students to create. So this is really important, and I noticed that my one of my colleagues, Rebecca, who's in the audience today, mentioned this as well. That having that topic organized as a pointer towards what they're going to do is essential, because without this, they're going to be all over the place. There are so many topics and so many things that they could write about. It's like telling them to write an essay without giving them an essay question. You've got to hone it down for them so that they know where to start. Um, and the filmmaking itself can be quite complicated anyway, so it just hone it down. Say, this is what we're doing today is we're talking about the items in your bedroom. Great, that's just that. And that will give them enough to start on. Believe me, they can come up with all kinds of things just with that one topic. Step two, give them a time limit, both in length of the video and the time they can spend on it. Again, very essential. This is all about putting limits on things, right? Which, of course, teenagers are used to us wanting to put limits on them, but it gives them that sense of safety so that they can work within that time frame, within in really clear parameters. 2 to 3 minutes tends to be the maximum. For a number of reasons. I think the most important reason is that to make 2 to 3 minutes of video requires, at a minimum, I would say about 6 hours of work, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So, given that kind of time, you don't want them making a 20-minute video, because unless you are doing a whole filmmaking class for your semester, so give them that time frame. And also, it as in terms of how their interest level is in the video itself, you know yourself from watching videos that, you if you start watching something that's quick on a YouTube or something, you'll find that after about a minute, you're losing interest. That's very normal, very typical in this day and age. Our brains are all over the place and distracted by so many things. You want to make sure that the students feel like what they're producing is of interest, and you don't have long segments of things that aren't going to matter. So it really forces them to hone down their ideas, make sure that they're focusing on what they really need to be focusing on, and not including a whole lot of extraneous information or spending a whole lot of time on it. Step three is have students select a role. And this is what I mentioned earlier. And this is actually really the fun part, because I personally find that it's best to let them decide who they're going to be. Give them the choices, but let them decide what role they want to take. Because if you're designating a student as an actor who really, really doesn't like to act or be in front of the camera, you're going to have problems. So make sure that you give them this list. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is just sort of your bare minimum. Like you have to have these 5 roles filled in some way. You don't have to have 5 people, but these roles need to be filled. So if you only have 2 or 3 students, one person can be the actor narrator, but they can also be the script writer. They can have more than one role, basically. But let them decide what that role is. Scriptwriter, obviously writing the script. This is for the student who really likes to write. The director, somebody who's obviously likes to be in charge, and we all have those in our class, the ones who want to be sitting in that chair like you saw on the first screen. The actor or narrator. So this is either if you're having them do a video that involves them being in it, that's that person, the actor, or the narrator, and that's really the voice actor. So the person who does the audio, which um, I've found even in my own work, I love doing the audio. I wouldn't be so comfortable with the actor part, but the audio, the voice actor part is fantastic. And so you might find that even though somebody doesn't want to do the acting portion, they may very well want to do the audio portion. The camera person, so this is the person who is holding the whatever mobile device you're using, um, whether that's a phone or a tablet or an actual camera, a film camera, whatever you have access to in your classroom. And then finally, the video editor. And basically, what that is that's the person who is in charge of all the pieces so that you can actually put the whole thing together. So it's the person who is going to be collecting the photos, is going to be collecting the footage, is going to help be deciding what the captions are on the screen. Basically, the asset control person, the one who's in charge of all of that. And there are some students, especially the ones who are very technically savvy, that's a perfect role for them. They can be in charge of all those pieces. So, step 4 is to make sure that they have access to the devices and materials they need to create the video. Really important that you get all of this sorted out before you start your video filmmaking class, because you don't want to be scrambling. This is the kind of thing that if you want to have a pre-session before you start making your video and just have it be, okay, today is an organizing situation and we're going to just figure out what pieces we have, what pieces we don't, what people can bring to class. You need to have some kind of mobile device, and that could just be one for the whole class. It can be individual. It can be students' own phones. It could be your phone. But you need to have something, obviously, to hold all of the pieces. Some basic film editing software. I'm not going to get too much into this today. This is definitely for another webinar just in itself. Basically, a basic one is iMovie, which is what the kids in the class that I worked with used. And that's it's very easy. You can go onto YouTube and find a short 5-minute tutorial on how to use the basic parts, but it's not one of these things. Film is no longer one of these very scary, things that you can't approach and that nobody can do it except for if you went to, film school for 4 years. It's not like that at all. These tools now are very straightforward, very, very easy to use, particularly if you have kids in your class who are really into this kind of thing. They'll just jump on it and be able to do it, no problem. There are also a lot of apps out there that you'll find more on your phones that you can use, but these are for shorter things and not quite what I'm talking about today, because this is actually putting lots of assets together, but there's lots of choices, and many of you are probably familiar with them. You don't want to give your kids too many choices. As I said, you want to just say, okay, today we're just going to be using this particular app or this particular editing software today, so that they don't get overwhelmed by all the choices. They need to have their photos and footage from their phones, cameras, Google Drive, Dropbox. These are all, for those of you who are not familiar with Google Drive or Dropbox, these are places that you can store data large files. So this is one of the big things that happens that's a problem when you're putting together video, is where do we put all the footage and how do we store everything? Because they're big, right? It's hard to put it all on your hard drive. You can't email it. You can't message it. So these are places that work very well. I did a Google Drive with this class in San Francisco, and they just uploaded all of their videos and their pictures, and we could label them and share and talk to each other, and that actually worked very well for that. Internet access is something that obviously you will need to have if you're using things like Google Drive or Dropbox. It's not always essential if you're when you're actually doing these video sessions, unless you're trying to pull photos or footage from the internet. But good to have it at some point. You can decide which class you want to spend time if you need internet access. And then music, either from their own collection, online, or self-created. I'm not going to talk about this too much today. Music gets really dicey because unless you're only using it for classroom purposes and it's not going anywhere else, you can't use a lot of pre-made music. You have to get royalty-free music, that type of thing. But we won't get into that today. Just be aware that that can be a little bit tricky. Okay. And then finally, step 5. Now comes the hard part. You have to let them run with it. And what I mean by that is you just need to let them get down to business and do it. You need to step back and get out of your teacher's chair, not sit on that chair that that student was on in that first slide. You need to let them sit there and figure it out. Basically, making video is like having a story with multiple writers. And so you can only imagine what kind of issues that creates. So it's not just writer's block for one, it's writer's block for 5, or how many people are working on it at a time. So you're going to get some people disagreeing on things and fighting over roles, but be patient. It you'll get through that initial planning session, and then it'll start looking like what it's supposed to look like. Some tips to give order to this creative process so you don't go nuts in those first 20 minutes while you see your students freaking out. Um, give students time to sort themselves out in their groups. Give them a time limit. Say you have 20 minutes to figure out who your roles, who has which role, who's doing what, honing in your topic. Um, the best way to do this is to actually have it in slots. So if you've got 20 minutes for your first session to do this part, and then another 20 minutes to just get themselves organized and decide what they're going to do for the next time slot, that's a good way to begin. That way they can kind of step away from it, come back and be like, okay, I thought about it and I actually can't use those pictures because whatever, or we need to take these other pictures because let them have time to walk away from it. As I said, make sure they have the devices they need to do the project so you're not wasting time if what you're doing that day is working with the devices. And then also your role selection, and choose that camera or video person so that managing the devices is set already. Okay. And then have them spend some time with just pencil and paper. By doing this, all students get a chance to write down their ideas. This is the good old-fashioned way to kind of get everybody on the same page right in the beginning. Don't let them have that device first thing, like, yeah, you were doing video and passing out all the whatever technical things they're going to be using, because they're going to get distracted and not listen to what they're supposed to be doing. So have them do it the old-fashioned way, sitting down in a group. This is what, script writers and people working with film do anyway when they're storyboarding, coming up with the story itself. A lot of times they're doing it the old school way, and this is where you can really hone in on ideas, and select your script writer at that point so that they can begin writing their narrative. Okay, now we're getting into the first video project, and I'd like to talk about the two different videos that we did. One with the class in Madrid, Victoria's class, and another with Cyril's class in San Francisco. These were the choices that we gave the class in Madrid. 3 choices, and it was supposed to be either a tour of your town, documentary style, so just with a narrative, a tour of your town or description of some element of where you live, and more with a YouTuber style where you're actually in the video walking us around and showing us the various elements of your city or town. And then the third choice was a how-to video explaining something you know how to make or do that you find fun or relevant to where you're from. Now, I should say that students, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but the students did this in a very short time frame. These were older students. They were 16, 17, So on the older side, they had a lot of more of their own time, and they didn't have any class time to do this in because it was like the last 3 days of school or something. And it was so impressive what they were able to actually do outside of school, and come up with something quick. And the how-to video was what they all chose just unilaterally without any pushing towards one or the other. They all wanted the choice three. Um, this was easier to do, and I'll explain why. So we're going to have you look at the how-to video now from the girls in Madrid. Thanks, Alistair. we I should I'm going to be talking over this because we decided not to have the audio portion so that you could see that how they put in the various captions. They put in music in the background, and this is that music thing I was talking about. It was music that was, not of their own creation. And so in order to show it, we'd have to get permission to use it, and trying to get permission from music companies to use popular music is a huge effort and a job in itself. So I'm just showing you this video that again they put together in three days, I think only in 1 or 2 sessions at home, and they did a great job. You can see that they were able to pick out their particular captions, showing us how to make this, how to make cookies. Um, did it in somewhat of a fast pace motion. This is all their own camera work, all their own devices. Thank you, Victoria, for making this available to us. You can see that there are some linguistic errors, but this is great. I find that to be really helpful as you're going through these, and it's a teaching point, right? So that when you get these videos in the end, you can actually critique it with have students critique it. They can do a movie review and talk about what they would change in the captions, anything that would be different. I love this how they do the fast pace. They've sped it up so that you can really see what they're putting together. Very creative. And you'll see we're at almost 2 minutes now with this video, and it's going to 2 minutes 33. Just about right. You don't want it to be too much longer than that. Lots of good close-ups of what they're doing, the process. There we go. We got the little Spanish upside down exclamation points there. Great. Wonderful. So that is our how-to video. Hope you enjoyed that. That is something that is quite easy to put together. The students, um, as Victoria had said, were really happy to do it and had a really fun time and needed almost no guidelines as far as how to put that together. So that is totally their own creation. Reason number one, I came up with 3 reasons of why after talking with Victoria, why they came up with the how-to videos as their first choice. And when you don't have very much time and the kids have to do this outside of class, location is really a key thing. With the older students, they have a lot more independence, obviously, and can organize their own time and do this on their own. The younger students, not so much. And this was the biggest complaint I had with if you have younger students, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, parents are usually still involved. They don't have a lot of say in where they're going and where they're spending their time and trying to organize all those things. And so, as a teacher, classroom time to do these videos is really essential. It has to be worked in somehow to class time because they just can't organize themselves enough outside of class with their friends, with the other students to get the video done. Um, so keep that in mind. The nature of the how-to video obviously is a step-by-step process, and I think that lends itself very well to just one location. They were in the kitchen the entire time. They could go through all the steps and in one place, so that made it easier for them. Reason number two was that there was a clear narrative structure. And again, this is just the nature of the how-to videos. You're explaining a process, right? It's a natural process. In this case, it was a recipe. It could be anything, though. We had another one where somebody was explaining different kinds of makeup techniques, and another one that was explaining how to build a house of cards. And so all of these things are easy step by step. The narrative structure is already built into the type of video. So this is a really nice one to start with, especially if you don't have classroom time and you need to have them do something outside of class. But again, remember the age thing can be tricky. Um, and then I mentioned also about the linguistic goals of the exercise, that you can make corrections to captions that are made. Let them go for it. Don't get hung up on whether they're making errors or not when they're making their narratives, when they're making these captions. Let them just do it. You don't want to stifle that creative process. These are things that you can change later. And the great thing about film is that it's easy to change. So you just go back in and change it after they have their little movie review or whatever with their other students. And finally, personalization. This is obvious that the how-to video really facilitates this. We had been trying to get them to do something more about culture, and which was why we had this sort of tour of your city type of thing. But they all wanted to do something that had something relevant to them. Obviously, I mean, we all want that, but particularly teenagers, they can add their personal touches, their color. We had that bright pink that they chose for their video, font choices. They can put their mark on it. It's a expression of them, and so that's a really driving force, I think, for the how-to videos, as well as the tangible outcome of it. So not only did they create this video, but they actually, created trays of cookies. So I think that the whole process itself is quite satisfying because you're getting products from it in the end, in a short period of time. Okay, tour of a town or city. So this is our example too, and I'm going to just give you a little background before you see this one. This is the one that I worked with the class here in San Francisco. These are some of the questions. I wanted to guide them a little bit, and let them know about what it was that they were creating. Because again, because I was working with younger students, I wanted to give them a framework so they could understand what was happening. These kids, this is actually in their French class that we did this project. So they're, taking the language already. So they got the concept of, oh, okay, I'm making a video for kids who are my age who are learning English as a foreign language, just like I'm learning French as a foreign language. So what are places that you think students your age would want to see? So that gives them an idea of how to select where they're going to show them. What are some of the most interesting elements of your town or city for you? Again, bringing it down, personalization. And how would you describe some of the things that are unique to your town or city? So things that they think make it different. And this, I always think that's fascinating because what I think is different and unique is not necessarily what they would think. And so it was fun to see what they selected as important points. Um, we narrowed it down again, as I talked about choices and limiting things. Really important, especially with the younger kids, just to say, okay, this is not going to be a YouTuber type. This is just going to be a narrative only with a template, which basically means what they did here was they selected a whole bunch of photos, not even any footage in this particular one I'm going to show you. They put it into a template that was available with iMovie, and then they wrote the narrative and did the audio on top of it. And so it just gave them a point of reference and a focus so that they didn't get too out of control with their ideas. So again, three basic questions. What do they really want to say? So important. You've got to get your core message across. And to do this, you need to sit down in that pen and paper situation and figure out what is it that we want to say? Like what's the point of this? Why are we doing this? Just like anything, when you're doing your lesson planning, or a presentation, you want to get to the core message, figure out what that is, and then build around it. And then how do we focus on the most important elements to support this message? So basically, like writing an essay, this is my message, this is my thesis, this is how I'm going to back it up with examples. Same process. What did this look like in action? Well, this was the fun part, watching the kids working in the classroom together. We had I noticed three different types. We had the active up in the front of the class group that you saw in the beginning when they're at the board and coming up with all their ideas. We had the quiet minding their own business group. and which, sort of sat in the back and had their headphones on and were trying to figure out bits and pieces on their own. And then I'm going to another location group who basically said, that's it, it's too loud in here, I need to go someplace else. And so they went out into the hallway, or down to the science room to do their audio portion so it could be quieter. You'll notice in this example I'm about to show you that the audio, they did a terrific job. The audio, you can hear a lot of voices in the background because it's not a recording studio, it's a school. Here they are. Here are the girls working on their audio in the science room. They had written, you can see on the screens, I don't know if it's visible, the narrative on the right side. They're reading that. And then on the other side, the other computer, they've got the actual video. So they figured this out on their own. I did not have to tell them how to do this. They figured out how to time it. Really impressive. So here we go. Alistair will have our second example here. This is a tour of a town or city done by our 7th graders here in San Francisco. You're going to hear the audio for this one. There was no music.
San Francisco is one of the most popular cities in California. It may be very small, but there are so many diverse cultures and people in this great city.
The weather here is usually very foggy. There are almost always clouds and it is very cold.
There are many famous monuments in San Francisco. There's the Golden Gate Bridge, which is built 78 years old. It's a beautiful bridge and is very popular for its color red.
There's also Chinatown. There are many Chinese immigrants living there. There are also many people, shops, and great restaurants there. This is the Chinatown Gate in downtown San Francisco.
Another tourist attraction is Union Square. You can shop for clothes, food, and many other things there. And during Christmas, you could go skating in the square. And there is a big Christmas tree in the middle.
There is great food here. There are many different cultures of food too. A popular food is a hamburger. It is very American. It isn't very healthy, but it tastes very good. We eat French fries and ketchup and mustard with it.
Another popular place to eat is Off the Grid. At Off the Grid, there are so many different food trucks that sell many delicious types of food from all over the world. You can also play fun games with friends.
Many San Franciscans love coffee. We get it from our favorite coffee shop. People usually buy a warm cup of coffee before going to work in the morning.
There are special holidays here in San Francisco. Coming up is Halloween, which is where everyone dresses up in costumes and it's a lot of fun. Kids go trick-or-treating, which is when kids go from house to house collecting candy. It's a fun night for everyone.
There's also Thanksgiving, which celebrates our gratitude for our great lives. We usually make a big feast with many different types of food with our whole family.
A great thing to do in San Francisco is go to a baseball game. Our team is the San Francisco Giants. We won 3 championships in the last 5 years. They are a great team. They play at AT&T Park, which is a beautiful stadium.
There are some great museums in San Francisco. There's the Exploratorium and the Academy of Science, which are fun museums for kids. You can do many experiments there. There's also the De Young and the Legion of Honor, which hold great art.
As you can see, San Francisco is just a wonderful city. It holds diverse cultures, has amazing restaurants, great shops, beautiful museums, and cool architecture. It is an amazing city to live in.
Thank you for watching.
Goodbye.
Okay, great. Those kids did a great job, and it was fascinating to see the different things that they came up with. Some of them had a lot more footage. They were in it, but I could only pick one for today. So hopefully that gave you a good idea of what you can do. They, as I said, used that template that was in iMovie, and so that made it a lot easier to just plug in the photos and write the narrative around that. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the things that I did to just keep this process moving and make it more manageable. This particular video was made by 3, and that seems to be a good number. You really don't want to get beyond 5 working together, especially with the first project, because it just gets too unmanageable Perhaps when you get to bigger projects, you can use more and they get more complicated as they get more complicated, but 3 is good to start. As I mentioned previously, 1 to 2 hours at a time with at least 3 slots of these 1 to 2 hour slots for the whole project is essential because if you're, like I said, it's a minimum of, I would say, to do it well, 6 hours to put something like this together based on the time that I spent in the class with these kids and the time that they spent outside to fix it up. We had a 2 hour session one day and we got a ton done, but it took the 2 hours to do it, which I was very grateful for the time to work on them, work on it with them. And also work on 1 or 2 elements of the video at a time so that you're not doing it all at once, which could feel really overwhelming. Have sessions where they're just picking the photos or just making, selecting the footage or creating the footage. Another session where they're just writing the narrative. That helps to keep it more manageable. Encourage the students to be deliberate. This is something that I often say in my presentations, this whole idea of being deliberate, very selective. Make sure that they're going in with clear expectations to really reduce the number of complications. They need to be selective in their choices of photos. They need to think carefully about their core messages. Have them have a checklist, which is what I'm about to show you. And this is probably one of the most important slides of the whole webinar is this one. This is your first filmmaking project checklist. Make sure all of these bits and pieces are taken care of within the process. Some of these can be done before, some afterwards, but this is what you need to basically get a handle on to do this. Select your team and designate roles. Write your narrative or voiceover. Decide which photos or footage you're going to use. Select your movie editing software. We talked about not having too many choices there. Choose a template if you're doing something like what the girls just did, that template that's in iMovie. Have them choose that from the start so they know what they're working with. Select keywords or phrases from your narrative. Write the narrative first and then pull out the keywords or phrases. Decide if you want music and where you're going to get it from. Again, that can be the tricky part, but if you're using it for your class, it should be fine. And then putting all of your elements together. Making sure that all those pieces are together, which is where that video editor person is really important to keep all that in one place, or you as the teacher if you've started a Google Drive. And then make time for editing and syncing all of these elements. So don't underestimate that. You need to let them have time to do that. It's time consuming. So speaking of time, timing is key as we're wrapping things up here. You need to make sure that you're leaving enough time for them to not only write the narrative, but then have the narrative make sense within the film itself. So make sure there's enough time for that. Make sure that if you are using music, that the music matches the tone that you really are trying to get across with your video. Don't pick, you can really tell if the music is inappropriate and it's too fast or too slow. So keep that in mind. And that's a fun thing for your students who are musicians. That's a really fun activity for them to do is picking the right music, the film score, so to speak, which is always very important. And then finally, picking your footage and photos very carefully, making sure that it's communicating what you want it to communicate. Okay, and then common fears and concerns. This is also another webinar in itself, but I want to mention them here because it is important for you to be aware of these things, especially if you're working with younger students. Be aware of copyright with photos, footage, and music. Again, if you're just using it within your tiny little classroom and not posting it anyplace else on YouTube or anything like that, you don't have to worry too much about that. But if it's anywhere else, you usually do. So make sure you're going to either it's their own pictures or you're going to royalty-free sites to use these things. Protection and privacy settings. If you do set up a Google Drive, for example, or a Vimeo channel, something where you're storing all of these videos, please make sure that they're very protected. You have that choice, the privacy, and it'll give you a choice if you want it to be a private group or not, and allowing access or not allowing access. That's all really important. You don't want other people getting access to this. Parental consent for any child under 18. I think this is a global thing. It certainly is in this country. I had to jump through hoops to make sure that everybody signed various documents by hand, allowing me to use not only the video but the photos today. So that's really important to get those items covered. school consent, which include, I needed to talk to the principal to clear it. I know Victoria also did a lot of effort on her part. Thank you, Victoria, for getting parental consent for her students and also from the principal to be involved in this project. And also time constraints. So just be aware that, it is time consuming. And so you need to somehow work that into your curriculum or get the proper permission to make sure that you can have that time in class to work on this. And then finally, our take three, that's my little mode of be patient, because it never is going to happen on the take one. And when you're doing your first take in film, very rarely is that the one that you say, yeah, that's it, we got it. It's going to take more than three, but I say three because that makes you feel a little bit better. So just be patient with the process. Know that the process itself is really valuable. It's not just the product that you're getting. In fact, I would say the process is more important than the product that you're getting. So be patient with that and enjoy it. Whatever comes out of that first project that you're doing, which I hope you all will jump into now, is going to be great. You're going to really learn a lot from your students, and it's going to be fun. So good luck, and we hope that you'll want to share some of your products with us when you're all done, or even just your video process. If you'd like to let us know how that's going and what things you ran into, it would be wonderful to hear about that. We have a place where you can enter into a site, and you can drop your video in there and share it and tell us about what the experience was like for your students. So I'd just like to thank everybody today for listening and being a good audience. I'm used to presenting in person, so this is, interesting to do it in this fashion. I feel like I want to talk to you all and find out more about what you've been doing. So please feel free to write to me. My email address is here. I'd like to give a huge special thanks to my two colleagues, and friends, Victoria Pascual at Colegio Monte Tabor Schoenstatt in Madrid, Spain. Thank you, Victoria, for that wonderful video and for all your effort and support. And Cyril Palomo at École Notre Dame des Victoires here in San Francisco, for the French teacher there, who was just so supportive of this and enthusiastic and wanting to do more. So stay tuned. We're gonna have more projects for you in the future. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Anna. Really engaging. Certainly looking at the chat. There's been a lot of people who will be taking up your suggestions. Let's go straight on to some questions. So first of all, from Labi Huari Mukhefi, who asks, is it useful to use student videos to teach aspects of language, like grammar, listening, reading, speaking, and writing, as part of this?
Great. Yeah, great question. And yes, I believe it definitely is. I think for a number of reasons. One is that students are usually more interested in seeing things that are made by students their age. I think much more than somebody like me making films. It's much more interesting for them to see something that somebody their age has created. And I think also because it's a more authentic way. So as you saw in that first video, the they did such a good job of explaining everything, but you could see that there were some linguistic errors, and that's a wonderful teaching point. So you as the teacher can bring that out, talk to the students about it. How would you have done that differently? How should they say it instead? I think that makes it much more real for them. It's a lot more daunting for students to feel like they have to create something perfect that looks like something a publisher created than if it's something that one of their fellow students created.
Okay, thanks. A question from Cami Scholars, who asks, how can we incorporate developing language skills as part of this?
So I think that, again, this is something that if you're, so for example, if you're trying to focus on particular language elements when you are doing this video project, that's actually something that I didn't mention. It's a terrific point to bring up. Say, for example, you're really trying to focus on the past tense and want to incorporate that into your project. That can be part of your planning session in the very beginning when you're talking about those core messages. You can also have that list of things that we really want to make sure that we're telling a story here that's in the past tense. So if you're making that topic really clear in the beginning and what the grammatical expectations are, that you need to be bringing that in some way, shape, or form, I think that's a great way to incorporate it.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Rula Arampetsika, who asks, if you've not created any video yourself beforehand, how
Mhm.
can you help your students? I think I
Okay, another excellent question, and this is something that I think is very Um, I hope that this is going to be the answer you're going to want to hear because what I find is that it doesn't really matter too much if you as a teacher have not been doing filmmaking on your own. What I found with these students that I worked with, these 12-year-olds, is that they were all very quick to jump on a lot of this movie editing software, the apps. They're not afraid of it like we are. They just go right in and start fiddling with it. So as long as you have the device and you have the software program that you've chosen. So for example, I mentioned iMovie if you have a Mac. There are lots of other choices. So if you want to email me and we can talk about what those are. But there are tutorials, seriously, 5 minutes. It tells you how to do it and it's really straightforward. Don't feel like you have to take control of that process. Remember, this is about putting the students in the director's chair. They can be in charge of that. Your job as the teacher is to keep them focused and keep them to their steps and make sure that you're slotting enough time for them to figure this stuff out. Let them figure it out. They can do it.
and I guess it can also be quite fun to spend some time getting to grips with the software and with the camera before the
Yes.
session as well.
Definitely. And that's where that whole portion of it that I said, you have that planning session where you make sure you've got your devices and things that are available. That can be your session where you're looking at editing software. You could even decide as a class what it is that you want to use, what's going to make the most sense for your particular class. So you could look at several, have the students go home and look at them and see which one they'd rather use. That can actually be a really nice activity just in itself. But let them teach you. Like I found even they were showing me things that I wasn't aware of either, and it was exciting. They embraced it and said, "That's fine. I'm going to try this and see if this works." It's a lot of troubleshooting, a great life skill to have.
Absolutely. Question from Asta Antulieni, who asks, how do you evaluate the students' work?
Okay, yeah, that's a good, very, very good question. So I would say again, this ties back to what the parameters are that you set out in the beginning. So I wouldn't base it necessarily on, the quality of the video that comes out because there's only so much that your students can manage on that level. But if they have met the topic requirement, if they've written their narrative as clearly and coherently as they can, if they have worked effectively together as a group. I think that's really key. If they show that they've each had a role and what their role is, that's another way. I think it's a more comprehensive way of evaluating. So just like you would with an essay, that you've got several different elements that you're looking at, but it's the same type of process. You just want to make sure that they've gotten the whole the that they've done the process in the way that makes sense and that is done in a way that produces something at the end. But try not to focus too much on the fact that they haven't created the, Hollywood blockbuster. It has to be more about the process.
Thanks. We had a couple of questions about trying this with different age groups.
Yeah.
People saying, how much of this could you do with learners of age maybe 6 to 7? Other people asking about working with adults.
Yes. Okay. No, great. Those are great questions. So I haven't worked with kids as young as 6 and 7, but I can tell you from what I see around me right now, with friends who have 6 and 7-year-olds, that there's not going to be a problem with them fiddling with stuff and putting things together. It probably would involve doing more of those apps, like the few that I mentioned in my slide that you actually just have to plug things in, or my daughter uses one that allows animals to talk, and so that you sort of put an audio on top of an animal talking. So much simpler type of linguistic thing that you're doing, and only one thing that you have to do. You just have to make the audio. You don't have to put together all these things. So I think going for one of those would be good for younger groups. For adults, I think what you're going to run into is there might be more fear around the actual video creation process, and also the tendency to be perfectionists. Filmmaking is one of those things that is never quite done. You can always keep tweaking it and fiddling with it. So again, really clear parameters for the grown-ups, and be just aware that you probably will need to leave a little bit more time for them to get comfortable with the process, more than you will the teenagers.
Okay, thanks. I had a really nice suggestion from Luis Bermudez, who suggested setting up a sort of film festival with the productions that your students have created.
Yes, great
Um,
idea. No, that's wonderful. Yay,
yeah,
that's what I
that's
like to
really
hear.
nice. And
Very
a
nice.
question. Oh, sorry. Okay. A question. One last question. We'll just squeeze in under the wire. From Labi Huare Mokhefi, who asks how we can use students' videos to develop their life skills outside language.
Lovely. Oh, great. Thank you for asking that. I mean, I think this is something that I was trying to get at a bit in the beginning, that this working together as a team like this and producing something on a project level is a life skill, especially in our work world today. And again, speaking from the culture that I come from, I know that the project-based type of learning is just a key element. And I think that film is able to give so many people different types of roles that everybody feels like they have a place, which I think is really key. I mean, you think about how comprehensive that is, and then in certain subjects you can't get that, and especially in the language classroom where you have some kids who really don't feel they have an aptitude for language and really struggle with it. If they're really good technically, this is an amazing thing for them to get involved in. They can just be doing that video editor part and feel like, I'm doing a great job in English class. Like, if this is something that they can really jump on, or if they're a musician or an artist, like I said, all those elements really help and capitalize on who they are and how they can adopt those skills into more of a life work situation. I actually feel like that is another webinar topic in itself, how film can teach life skills. So great comment. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anna. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for.
You.
But
Yes.
don't forget,
Thank
everyone, that
you.
we'll so don't forget, everyone, that we'll be back next week when Joanna Costa will be talking about the stress-free way to prepare students for Key for Schools. You can sign up for that session by visiting our events page, which one of my colleagues will type into the chat right now. The recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and on our YouTube channel by Friday, and we'll send you an emailed certificate of attendance by Monday. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you for my colleagues, Jane, Sarah, Charlotte, and Annie, for their helping look after the chat. And most of all, thank you, Anna, for a really fascinating session. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody, and thank you for coming. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.